This morning, the political disagreement that has taken all year to settle.
It will cut school taxes for homeowners by about 41%, and for people who have business properties, about 23%.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick with us on this major property tax relief deal. But what will happen to Texas renters? Are they going to see any relief? State Rep John Bryant, a Dallas Democrat, making his first appearance on the program. Plus, a glimpse inside the Texas Attorney General's office after Ken Paxton was impeached and suspended.
So those first 2 weeks over there was a lot of talk about what happens now with the impeachment, what blah, blah. It was always about the same subject.
John Scott giving us one of his last interviews before leaving as the state's temporary Attorney General. And Texas is no longer one of the top 5 states to do business. Wait until you hear why.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to you. What's happening at the state capitol and the 2024 election are dominating Texas political headlines right now. State Senator Roland Gutierrez here already campaigning for U.S. Senate. His first stop, Uvalde, Texas. Gutierrez has pushed to raise the age limit from 18 to 21 to purchase some semi-automatic rifles. You know, Gutierrez announced his campaign for U.S. Senate last week. He is the second high-profile Democrat trying to unseat Ted Cruz next year. Dallas Congressman Colin Allred already in that race. The federal government's trying to help Texas improve its electric grid. The U.S. Department of Energy is giving Texas $60 million. It's to make the state's power grid more reliable in extreme weather. The money came from the bipartisan infrastructure law that President Biden got passed and can be used for a number of things to keep the lights on here in the state when the weather gets bad. And Texas is no longer one of the top 5 states to do business. That's according to a poll from CNBC. For 16 years, the cable channel has published a list of America's top states for business. For the first time, Texas fell out of the top 5. CNBC said things like power grid issues, rising crime, poor health care, and a rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion led to the state's decline. Texas is now falling behind states like North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia, and Minnesota. But let's begin this morning with something Texas lawmakers got right. A property tax cut, one that leaders have haggled over all year. The deal finally got done, has something for homeowners and for businesses. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick explains how it all came together after one face-to-face meeting that lasted just a half hour. Governor, congratulations on this. Let's talk specifics, though. If I own a $300,000 house, what is this going to save me?
It will cut your school taxes, Jason, by about 41%. That's a whopping number. That will be between $1,200 and $1,450 per household on average. The lower number is for under 65 and the higher number because they get some additional benefits over 65. So on the average home in Texas, which is between $300,000 and $325,000, that's the average home. Obviously, there are many higher priced homes in the Dallas-Fort Worth, the suburbs, and in the downtown areas. But on average, $1,200 to $1,450. And what this means, because it's in the Constitution that the people will vote on this year in November, it will take effect this year, Jason. There'll be one constitutional amendment with 3 articles in it. Will be the homestead exemption, $100,000 for all homesteaded properties. It will be the compression because that number goes outside the budget a little bit, so the voters have to approve that because it's such a large number for tax cuts, because tax cuts are counted as a cost against our budget, actually. And then third, it will be this new item, which is the 20% circuit breaker, a 3-year pilot program for any properties that would be a second home, a rental home, or any commercial property that has a value of $5 million or less, and their appraisal is over 20%.
Explain what this circuit breaker actually means.
So right now, for anyone who owns a second home or a rental property or commercial property, there's no limit. The appraised value can go up 30, 40, 50% or more. So this just is a circuit breaker at 20%. That's the most it could go up. Just like when your homesteads, there's a circuit breaker at 10%. It can't go up more than 10. So this is something that we're going to try, look at the data. And again, it's limited to the property's worth $5 million or less.
The other new part of this deal is also going to affect a lot of small businesses with the franchise tax,
Yes.
people who had to file a franchise tax return and had to pay it. But explain how this is going to work for thousands of small businesses across the state.
What's millions, actually. There are over 1 million businesses that generate less than $1.2 million a year in revenues. I'm talking about small businesses. They don't have to pay the tax, but they have to file the form. Well, just filing the form, if you're a small business, you don't want to have to pay an accountant $200 to file a form that says you don't owe anything. And if you don't file the form, it's a $50 penalty. So we're wiping that over 1 million small businesses under 1.2 million we're wiping off anyone who doesn't owe a tax from having to file any paperwork. Then we've increased the 1.2 million, which is the floor now, to 2.5 million. That will take 67,000 small businesses whose revenues are less than 2.5 million. Will take 67,000 small businesses off the franchise tax. That's 40% of all businesses that pay the franchise tax. So that's huge for small business. The goal of the House and the Senate was to help homeowners and small business owners. We want to grow small businesses, and that's what this bill does. And again, I appreciate the Speaker and I met face-to-face last Tuesday, I think it was, in Austin, and we worked tirelessly day and night along with Senator Betancourt and Representative Will Metcalf to craft this bill, and I'm very pleased with it.
Governor, you've been trying to get this done for months, for years, but especially in this session, you've been working since January when you guys gavelled in there in the state Senate and across the hall in the House too. How did you finally come to an agreement? What was that like?
Well, when we came into the second session on the first day a couple of weeks ago, I said on the podium that I've invited the Speaker to sit down and meet face-to-face because I thought we could get it done in about 30 minutes if we did. And so he accepted the invitation. We met last week and he came in and we did have about a 30-minute meeting. And we pretty much agreed in principle on the big things in this bill in that meeting, as I thought we might, because we've had a lot of discussion for 6 months. So he knew where we were in the Senate and our members. I knew where he was and his members in the House. And then we both went home or to our offices, and we've been on the phone with each other as late as 9 o'clock last night, working through all the details. This is the biggest tax cut in American history, property tax cut, and maybe in world history. And so it went into overtime, as I said in my press release, but it's a great bill.
Governor, congratulations on this, and we always appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks. Jason, you've been talking to me about these property taxes as long as we've known each other. You're going to get a big cut to your bill, too.
All right, now to Austin, where state troopers are apparently not going anywhere, despite Austin saying they've had enough. Austin's police department is short-staffed. The city asked troopers to come in and help out, but Austin ended that partnership after reports that were later to be found unfounded of a trooper pulling a gun on a 10-year-old boy. Aya Mitra is the senior managing editor of the Texas Tribune. You at the Texas Tribune have been following this story since it's all been happening. Dallas had the same thing happen a few years ago as well, where state troopers kind of may have overstepped their bounds as far as many community leaders were thinking. What do you think happens next in this case?
Well, the fact of the matter is, as you said, is that Austin still remains, several hundred staffers short in terms of their police force. So the shortages and the issues continue. The governor has said that the DPS has statewide jurisdiction. So, and he's actually increased the number of officers, DPS troopers patrolling. So for the near time, it's going to seem like this presence isn't going to go away from DPS. But obviously, there was data that was showing some issues there with some of the patrolling. So if something like that kind of rises up again, then that might kind of change the direction of this.
Let's stay on first responders for a moment here. There's a massive drop in the number of volunteer firefighters. Is Texas going to do anything about that for rural communities?
And it's such an important thing too, because of all, how big the state is and how big our rural areas are too, and the need for EMS workers across the state. And so, the state, there are like scholarships for EMS programs particularly for people who are working or living in rural areas. There's also, more emphasis on trainings and certifications to expand that too. So those are some efforts going on across the state to address a really critical area because the state's so big and the population centers are so spread across.
Something to keep an eye on. Ian, thanks. Back to you in just a moment here. Coming up, a Dallas Democrat says Texas homeowners deserve a bigger property tax cut, and the legislature can include renters in on the relief. State Rep John Bryant with us to explain. Plus, John Scott giving us our first glimpse inside the Texas Attorney General's office after Ken Paxton's impeachment and suspension. Inside Texas Politics, back in a moment. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. You know, homeowners will see property tax relief this year, so will businesses. But one Dallas Democrat says the legislature can do better, especially for renters. State Rep John Bryant is a Dallas Democrat who introduced a more robust tax cut plan late last week. Representative Bryant, welcome to the program. Let's talk about relief for renters. There are so many renters in this state. Democrats tried to get some relief for renters in there. Republicans weren't having it, though.
Well, we found it unacceptable that nearly 40% of all Texas households are rental households. In Dallas, it's 57%. In my district, it's 67%. And we tried to include them. Remember, the surplus is a result of sales tax collections, and rental households have contributed as much to sales tax collections as all the rest of us. So they should share in this, and they pay property taxes through their rent. So we offered an amendment to reduce, or rather to rebate up to 10% of the rent of a rental household over the previous year as part of their share of this tax reduction effort.
And Republicans kept saying, listen, this deal is done. Let's sign off on what everyone finally agreed on, right?
That's right. The train was moving, and they did not agree with helping renters. They say landlords will reduce the rent, and we say that's just impossible to believe. So we wanted to give the renters their share of property tax relief.
On Thursday afternoon, you tried multiple times to get an amendment added to this bill, and Republicans shut you down with points of order at every turn before you could even lay it out. And this was to increase the basic allotment, how much school districts are getting for students, to educate students. Will you lay out what you wanted to add and how that would be paid for?
Yes. We are 44th in the United States in support for public education. And this amendment would have simply made up for the last 10 years in which no increase has been provided to our independent school districts. It would have made up for the inflation only. And it also would have produced a $4,300 a month teacher pay raise, and it would have been permanent. That is to say, it would be part of law. It wouldn't just be a one-time gift. In our view, it's irresponsible to take up a bill that is dealing with reduction in the source of funding for public schools without dealing with public education and underwriting it fully.
Representative, I'm curious if Democrats can point to anything in the bill that passed and say that originated with us.
Yes, our pressure on them with regard to, for example, our amendment to double the homestead exemption, twice as much relief for homeowners as the Republicans proposed, forced them to move to an agreement in a hurry. We introduced the bill and had a press conference about it. They then had the Senate then had to agree with the House, and the House had to accept exemptions. Remember, the House bill was entirely compression, which gives away a huge amount of the tax relief to skyscrapers, refineries, oil wells, and things like that. The crisis we're facing is that homeowners are paying way too much in property taxes, and renters are also through their rent. The crisis is not skyscrapers and refineries.
Those commercial landowners definitely who have been getting breaks for a long time on their property taxes. Representative, we appreciate the time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When Ken Paxton was impeached and suspended as Texas Attorney General, Governor Abbott called on a Fort Worth attorney to fill that role. His name is John Scott. He spent 6 weeks, the last 6 weeks, serving as the state's top law enforcement officer before leaving on Friday. But before he went, he did reveal a glimpse inside the office and about employee morale after all of the political upheaval.
Over at the AG's office as the provisional AG, it was a whole different role. I didn't feel like doing interviews or anything publicity was going to help the process. In fact, it might have fueled the fire a little bit. And so the real goal at that point in time was to visit with the folks that work there and to reinforce that idea of why they came to work there. And the great privilege it is to get to go into court and say, hey, John Scott, Your Honor, here on behalf of the state of Texas. And that's something that all those lawyers get the right to go in there and say as a result of their capacity. So those first 2 weeks over there, there was a lot of talk about what happens now with the impeachment, what blah, blah. It was always about the same subject. And it wasn't about the subject about the Attorney General's office. And from my experience there, I knew what normal sounded like. And so after about 2 weeks, people were back talking completely about cases and what is our next step. And that's what's going on back today. They're back to, I would say, as close to normal as it's been.
John, talk about morale on the is it the 6th floor? Is that where the top floor for Attorney General? 8th floor of the Attorney General's office. Well, what was morale like when you landed there? Were you welcome? Were they suspicious of you? And you talked about meetings too. Did you have to have a lot of one-on-one meetings and after dinner or after hours dinner and drinks and stuff to get people kind of back to where they should be?
So they were extremely accommodating, and I don't want to get into their mindsets of because I don't know, and I don't want to speak for them. What I felt was that, and my goal coming in, I took the smallest office I could find on the floor, and a lot of that was to make sure that they understand I was last and least amongst the equals there. I was there to help serve them, serve the state. And I wanted to make sure they understood it was literally there in a humble role. I wasn't coming there to dictate to them, but I wanted to make sure that they understood the rest of the state was there for them and their mission.
John Scott giving us his exit interview there before returning to private practice over the weekend. We had questions for him about this role and his time as Texas Secretary of State. Our uncut conversation on a new episode of Y'all-itics ready to download this weekend. Still ahead, though, on this program, is Texas still a good place to do business? A big survey says there are better states now, and it's because of what the Texas legislature has been doing. The Roundtable's ready for this one when we come back. Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Aya Mitra is back with us in Austin from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is a columnist at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Bernadine Steptoe, political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Aya, let's start with the big $18 billion property tax cut plan. Homeowners love it, renters do not.
That's right. I think, and a big winner in all of this is Dan Patrick, who really stuck to, an effort to keep the homestead exemption increased. And so when you look at the final deal, sure enough, you got that exemption up to $100,000, a big win for Dan Patrick on that front.
Indeed so, but it is a huge win for Dan Patrick. He didn't come off his horses on that thing, but everyone can claim a win on this, right?
Oh, he got the full exemption, and he told you you'll get some money and I'll get some money, and everyone who owns a home will get some money. The people who aren't happy, obviously renters, and some of the school teachers who wonder what happened to their pay raises. They'd like to have those pay raises maybe later in the year. Amazingly, the people who really aren't happy are the core Republican Party activists. They want property taxes done away with. They're not happy with anybody in Austin.
How likely is that, Bernadine? Nobody wants to pay property taxes. No renter, no homeowner, no business owner.
I know, but how can you keep the state running if you don't have taxes at this point? If they're going to eliminate them, they have to come up, or they should come up, with a way to pay to run the government. So, and then in terms of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, he was a big winner, but I think also he had to learn that he needs all branches of government in order to get his priorities passed, the House and the governor's office. So I think that it was a good ending as far as everyone is concerned.
And Bud, let's switch off and talk about polls, because we've heard for 20, 25 years that Texas Republicans love to talk about the Texas miracle. What a great state this is for business. CNBC said, you know what, there are better states out there right now. Are you surprised by Texas's ranking?
I'm not surprised. It is a little bit of a political talking point. They're trying to impose values that don't really apply in Texas. Some of the laws that Texas passed are designed for Texas to become more conservative and to discourage diversity. That was the way the laws were intended. They want Texas to have more conservative people and be a more conservative state. You know, what did kind of hit home was the point about health care, because by not expanding Medicaid, Texas has, for every dollar you spend on Medicaid, you get back $6, $7 in money and growth to the economy. That's where business really pays for mistakes in the legislature.
And Texas has refused to expand Medicaid like so many other Republican states have. Bernadine, your thoughts on this CNBC poll where Texas fell out of the top 5?
Well, I think that it shows, which I'm not really sure that the Republicans are even concerned about it, is the fact that not every state or not every business is concerned in coming into, want to come into a state where the social issues are so conservative. But I think that, I don't even think the Republicans at this point care.
I can't imagine they do, and you're down there in the state capitol. I can't imagine they're paying this any attention. But realistically, is Texas losing any ground with business?
You know, when you look at the kind of what the poll looked at too, you look at things that Texas still ranked really high on. You know, when it aspects of job growth, workforce, aspects of access to capital, the areas where Texas really got dinged on were things that, you know, like things that Bud mentioned: healthcare, infrastructure, aspects of the grid and water utilities, education funding as well. Those are the areas that may not necessarily, you know, resonate with businesses trying to come, but those are certainly issues that, you know, the state's dealing with.
Yeah, they are issues the state's dealing with. Bud, quickly, go ahead.
Jason, I was going to say, you know, what we do hear from HR professionals is that fewer young people want to come and move to Texas, particularly Austin and Houston, and in particular, fewer young women want professional jobs.
All right,
and
Bud,
that's the workforce.
Bud, Bernadine, Ian, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching as well. Join us again next Sunday as we take you inside Texas politics. Until then, have a great week.